He pressed his leash-tightened hand against the gangway rail, only to be barred from boarding, until a Captain Sepp's voice boomed through the terminal. The salt-laced air, a familiar balm from countless deployments, pulled Robert's lungs full, a promise of open water. His 72 years weighed heavily on his shoulders, a silent testament to a life lived in service, yet his grip on Max's harness was steady. The black Labrador, his service dog, padded softly beside him, a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant hum of the ship's engines. Robert's eyes, etched with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen too much and asked for too little, scanned the gangway, a path he had navigated on battleships and cargo vessels, never expecting this path, this gentle pleasure cruise, to be the one that snagged. Just a few steps, Max, then we're on board. A week of quiet and calm, the anticipation, a fragile thing he rarely indulged, fluttered in his chest. A rigid steward, his uniform a pristine white against the industrial gray of the terminal, stepped forward, his posture a ramrod of corporate policy. "Your dog can't step foot on this ship," he barked, the words clipped and sharp, cutting through the murmuring crowd like a blunted blade. Robert felt the sudden tension in Max's leash, the dog's ears swiveling, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "He's a service dog, trained, certified. Why are we even having this conversation?" Robert's voice, a gravelly whisper from years of shouting orders over wind and gunfire, managed, "He's a service animal, I have his papers." His hand, calloused and veined, reached for the worn leather wallet in his inner jacket pocket, the documents a familiar comfort against the sudden chill of dismissal. The steward's eyes, devoid of empathy, flicked from Robert to Max, then back, a dismissive sweep. Regulations. No animals on board, service or otherwise. Company policy. He gestured vaguely toward a printed sign taped to a stanchion, its text too small to read from this distance, its message, however, perfectly clear in the steward's unyielding stance. A knot tightened in Robert's stomach, a familiar clenching from long ago moments of injustice, but this time the stakes felt different. This wasn't about survival, it was about dignity, about the quiet understanding between a man and his loyal companion. Max nudged his hand, a soft, reassuring pressure, as if sensing the encroaching despair. "I served 2 tours. Why can't he see my service dog helps me stand tall?" Robert's thoughts screamed, though his face remained a mask of controlled composure. The steward's clipped command echoed like a whip in the cavernous terminal, drawing the attention of other boarding passengers. Whispers rippled through the line, hushed questions, curious glances. Robert felt the heat rise in his cheeks, the sudden, unwanted spotlight amplifying his vulnerability. He had faced down armed insurgents with less trepidation than he now faced this unwavering wall of bureaucratic indifference. Max let out a soft whine, a low, questioning sound that pierced the rising tension. The steward took another step closer, invading Robert's personal space. The tang of disinfectant mixed with the briny air, a strange, unsettling blend. "Sir, if you do not comply, we will have to ask you to leave the terminal." His voice, though still clipped, held a new edge, a threat barely veiled. Robert's hand, still clutching the leash, trembled almost imperceptibly. "Leave? After all this? After preparing for months, looking forward to this one, small escape?" The thought was a bitter pill, crushing the fragile hope he had allowed himself to harbor. He felt the weight of Max's head against his leg, a silent plea for understanding. Before we continue with the story, be sure to let us know where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments. We love learning about our viewers. Now let's get back to the story. A female voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the sudden silence. "He's clearly a veteran. Can't you see the way he carries himself?" A woman in the boarding line, her face flushed with indignation, stepped slightly forward. Other passengers shifted, their expressions a mix of curiosity and growing unease. Robert felt a flicker of something akin to gratitude, but it was quickly extinguished by the steward's unyielding glare. The steward's polished shoes clicked on the deck planks, a percussive reminder of his authority, as he ignored the outburst, his focus solely on Robert and Max. The service dog, usually so stoic, began to paw at Robert's leg, a gentle, insistent pressure. "He knows. He always knows when something's wrong. Robert's gaze drifted past the steward, past the boarding desk, toward the vast expanse of the ship, its sheer size mocking his predicament. The muted hum of engines beneath the hushed murmurs of the crowd felt like a heartbeat, a rhythm he was being denied. The dream of quiet days at sea, of feeling the sun on his face and the gentle sway of the ocean beneath him, began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard knot of disappointment. "Sir, this is your final warning." The steward's hand, surprisingly firm, closed around Robert's arm, a clear attempt to guide him away from the gangway, away from the promise of the cruise. The touch, though not violent, was an invasion, a violation of his quiet dignity. Robert stiffened, a lifetime of training kicking in, the instinct to resist, to hold his ground. Max, sensing the heightened tension, let out a low growl, a rumble deep in his chest, a sound rarely heard from the usually placid animal. It was a warning, a protective instinct, a primal response to the threat. The steward's grip tightened, his fingers digging slightly into Robert's bicep. The service dog's clipped harness brushed against the salt-sprayed rails of the gangway, a subtle friction that spoke of the physical barrier between them and the ship. Robert's mind raced, a whirlwind of legal rights, moral obligations, and the gnawing feeling of being utterly helpless. They can't do this. Not to a veteran, not to someone who relies on his dog to just live. The humiliation, hot and stinging, threatened to overwhelm the carefully constructed walls he had built around his emotions over decades. Just as despair threatened to consume him, a deep voice, resonant and clear, boomed through the terminal, cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd, silencing the steward's clipped command, and making Robert's head snap up. "Stand down, steward. What is going on here?" The steward's grip on Robert's arm slackened, his head swiveling, his face suddenly pale. Robert looked up, hope, a fragile, almost forgotten sensation, stirring in his chest. The steward's glare, which had been so unwavering, now tightened like steel, but it was no longer directed at him. The captain's voice, though not raised in anger, carried an undeniable authority that reverberated through the cavernous terminal, an immediate counterpoint to the steward's petty tyranny. Passengers, who had been whispering and discreetly recording on their cell phones, now turned en masse, their gazes shifting from Robert and Max to the imposing figure striding purposefully down the gangway. Epaulettes, heavy with gold braid, glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting a silent, powerful disapproval. The steward, a moment ago so resolute, now looked like a child caught in a transgression, his shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. He saw, someone with real authority saw what was happening. A faint tremor, not of fear, but of dawning vindication, ran through Robert's hand, still clutching Max's leash. The captain, a man whose presence filled the space, stopped a few feet from Robert, his gaze, sharp and assessing, sweeping over the veteran and his service dog. He didn't immediately address the steward, but instead, his eyes met Robert's, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice. It was a look that conveyed understanding, respect, and a hint of something else, a resolve to set things right. The hushed whispers of the passengers intensified, evolving into murmurs of approval and relief. Several cell phones, previously aimed surreptitiously, were now held aloft, openly recording the unfolding drama, the bright screens illuminating the tension in the air. "Sir, is there a problem?" The captain's voice, though calm, held an undertone of steel directed at Robert. It was a simple question, yet it was an invitation, a clear signal that Robert now had a voice, that his rights, previously trampled, were now acknowledged. Max, sensing the shift in dynamics, let out a soft sigh, a release of the tension that had gripped him. Robert, though still shaken, felt a surge of strength. He straightened his shoulders, a lifetime of military bearing reasserting itself. "This is my chance to explain, to make them understand. My service dog, Max," Robert began, his voice still gravelly but gaining firmness. "He's essential for my balance, for my PTSD. He didn't need to elaborate, didn't need to offer the worn papers he still clutched in his hand. The captain's gaze, steady and unwavering, already conveyed comprehension. Robert could see the flicker of recognition in the captain's eyes, a silent understanding of the invisible wounds of war. The silence in the terminal was absolute, a collective holding of breath, as everyone waited for the captain's response, for the shoe to drop. The steward, emboldened by the captain's initial restraint, attempted to interject. "Sir, company policy explicitly states no animals," but the captain raised a hand, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that nonetheless silenced the steward instantly. It was a clear demonstration of hierarchy, a public rebuke. The steward's face, already pale, flushed a deep red. Robert felt a quiet satisfaction, a small victory in a battle he hadn't sought. Max leaned against his leg, a warm, comforting presence, amidst the sudden, unexpected attention. A text alert blazed across the captain's screen, held discreetly in his other hand. His eyes flickered down for a fraction of a second, then back up, a quick, almost imperceptible reaction to the urgent message. It was the public outrage, the viral videos already being uploaded and shared, the digital firestorm igniting across the internet, demanding accountability. The captain's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek, a silent acknowledgement of the rapidly escalating situation. The digital world, unseen but undeniably present, was now exerting its pressure. "Not on my ship, sir," the captain finally stated, his voice low but clear, addressing the steward directly, his tone leaving no room for argument. It wasn't a question, but a definitive declaration. The steward's shoulders slumped further, his meticulously maintained composure cracking. The click of his polished shoes on the deck planks suddenly sounded hesitant, almost apologetic. Robert watched the exchange, a silent observer of the crumbling facade of petty authority, the steward's certainty dissolving under the weight of the captain's unwavering command. The captain turned his full attention back to Robert, his expression softening, a hint of genuine empathy in his eyes. "My apologies, sir. There seems to have been a grave misunderstanding." His words were not just an apology, they were an affirmation of Robert's rights, a public validation of his presence, and Max's. The raw indignation that had simmered within Robert for minutes, feeling like hours, began to ebb, replaced by a dawning sense of relief. Max let out a soft sigh, settling at Robert's feet, his tail thumping once against the polished floor. The sound of camera shutters clicking, though muted, was a constant reminder of the public eye bearing witness to this pivotal moment. The steward, defeated, finally dropped his gaze, his hand no longer on Robert's arm. The air, thick with tension only moments before, now felt lighter, almost breathable. The hushed murmurs of the passengers had transformed into quiet exclamations of approval and admiration for the captain's decisive intervention. Robert felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for himself, but for the principle of what was happening, the quiet triumph of right over wrong. The captain's next words, spoken with unwavering clarity, were a sudden, unexpected twist, a profound act of restorative justice. "Not only will you board, sir, but you and your service companion will be granted VIP access and an upgrade to the owner's suite, effective immediately." The statement hung in the air, a breathtaking pronouncement that left the crowd stunned. Robert's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief mixing with the dawning vindication. The steward's glare, which had been tightening like steel only moments before, now wavered, and his jaw dropped, a silent gasp of shock. The captain's words hung in the air, a testament to his authority and a balm to Robert's wounded dignity. The stunned hush that followed was profound, the collective intake of breath from the assembled passengers, a palpable wave. Cameras, which had been recording the confrontation, now swiveled, focusing on the captain, then on Robert, then on Max, eager to capture every nuance of this remarkable turn of events. The steward's hand, which had gripped Robert's arm with such cold certainty, dropped in shock, his face a mask of disbelief and utter defeat. His pristine uniform now seemed to sag, reflecting the sudden collapse of his arrogant stance. Robert, for a moment, simply stared, the enormity of the captain's pronouncement sinking in. An upgrade to the owner's suite, VIP access? It was more than he could have ever imagined, a stark contrast to the humiliation of being barred from boarding. A quiet, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a rare sight, as he looked down at Max. The black Labrador, sensing the shift in energy, nudged Robert's hand, a soft, happy whine escaping him. The tang of disinfectant and brine, once an unpleasant reminder of the conflict, now simply melded into the background, part of the ship's promise. The captain, his gaze unwavering, offered a slight, respectful nod to Robert. "My ship operates on principles of respect and honor, sir, and that includes honoring those who have served." His voice, though still firm, held a deeper timbre now, a resonance that conveyed both authority and genuine empathy. It wasn't just a formal apology, it was a recognition of Robert's sacrifice, a validation that transcended company policy and petty regulations. Robert felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of being seen, truly seen, after years of feeling invisible. The steward, still reeling, attempted to salvage some semblance of his authority. "But Captain, the regulations," his voice trailed off as the captain's eyes, now colder than the sea itself, fixed on him. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of the ship's engines, a steady thrum that seemed to underscore the captain's absolute control. The steward visibly flinched, his bravado utterly extinguished. Robert watched, a quiet observer to the unfolding drama, the tables having turned so decisively and swiftly. "There are regulations, steward, and then there is common decency. On this ship, decency will always prevail." The captain's words were a curt order, yet they echoed like thunder through the terminal, a public reprimand that left no room for interpretation. The steward's humiliation was complete, undeniable, and broadcast for all to witness. Robert felt a strange mix of emotions, satisfaction for the justice served, but also a flicker of pity for the man whose arrogance had led to such a swift and public downfall. The captain then turned to a younger, more sympathetic-looking steward standing nearby. "Escort Mr. Miller and his service dog to the owner's suite immediately. Ensure they have everything they need for a comfortable voyage." The younger steward, looking relieved to be out of the immediate line of fire, nodded eagerly, a faint smile touching his lips. "Yes, Captain, right away." The click of his polished shoes on the deck planks, unlike the previous stewards, was now a sound of willing compliance, of ready service. As the younger steward approached, his demeanor respectful and welcoming, Robert felt Max stir at his side. The service dog, his head held high, seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, the triumph. Max trotted by Robert's side, his tail giving a soft wag, a silent celebration of their victory. The gentle friction of Max's harness against Robert's side was a familiar comfort, a constant reminder of their bond, of the unwavering loyalty that had brought them through this unexpected ordeal. The public, who had just moments ago been recording his humiliation, now applauded, a soft, appreciative murmur that swelled into a wave of genuine warmth. Robert, his 72 years suddenly feeling lighter, felt a profound sense of vindication. It wasn't just about the upgrade, the VIP access, it was about the principle, about the captain's unwavering commitment to what was right. He had faced down hostility with quiet dignity, and now, that dignity was being not just acknowledged, but celebrated. The hull's metal tremor, under his trembling hand, a subtle vibration from the ship's engines, felt not like a barrier, but like a welcome, a promise of open seas and calm waters. He looked back at the captain, who stood watching them, a quiet sentinel of justice. Robert lifted his hand, a slow, deliberate movement, and executed a crisp, unhesitating salute, a gesture forged in decades of military discipline, now offered as a token of profound gratitude. It was a salute not just to a captain, but to a man who understood the true meaning of service, honor, and compassion. The captain, standing under the bright fluorescent lights that now seemed to illuminate rather than expose, returned the salute with equal solemnity, a silent acknowledgement of their shared understanding. As Robert, with Max trotting confidently beside him, began to walk towards the gangway, escorted by the new steward, the world around him seemed to hum with a new-found harmony. The murmur of the crowd, the click of Max's paws on the polished deck, the distant thrum of the ship's engines, all blended into a symphony of quiet triumph. The captain remained standing, watching them go, bathed in the soft glow of the terminal lights, his presence a beacon of decisive mercy. The hush before the captain's step echoed down the corridor, a final poignant note before the door to their new journey opened.